Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. We'll just be starting in a few moments, so thank you for joining. All right, so it looks like everyone is here, so we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome to the first set of the three-part series in our MAHA webinars. MAHA, of course, standing for Make America Healthy Again. And today we're going to be focusing on what we can learn from the European food legislation. Before we get started, I wanted to quickly introduce myself. My name is Michael Gleason. I am the product director for bakery for Prados USA. I've been with the company 10 years now, focusing primarily on bringing clean label, innovative solutions to the market. Joining us, we also have Sofia Moraes, who is the Prados Group Regulatory Affairs Director. She has a degree in food engineering and as a nutritionist, as well as an additional degree in food quality and a master's in food science. She's been working in regulatory and scientific affairs for the last 25 years in both B2B and B2C sectors. She holds the global level for Prados Regulatory Affairs Department since 2018, where she oversees regulatory governance, as well as the development and implementation of regulatory strategies, enabling Prados to reach their target markets. She's originally from Portugal, but for the last 17 years has lived in Brussels, where Prados Global is headquartered. Next, we also have Erin Ball joining us from the Grains Food Foundation. She has over 17 years in nonprofit association management and has spent the last 13 of those advancing nutrition research and science-based communications at the Grain Foods Foundation, where she served as the executive director since 2022. She also serves as the president of the Grain Food Foundation's affiliated 501c nonprofit, the Grains Food Research Institute. So welcome, Sophia and Erin. Now, just to take a look at the agenda for today, we'll start off with just a few housekeeping details. We'll move into a little overview of who Prados is. Next, we'll talk about what is the MAHA project. And we'll start by looking at a brief history of the European food law, and then a closer look at additives, the status of certain additives in the US versus the EU. In particular, looking at the Texas Senate Bill 25 and the potential impact that could have on some labeling. And then we'll look at an example of an EU banned ingredient and what the timeline looked like ongoing from an accepted ingredient to a banned ingredient. Now, we'll have Q&A at the end of the session as well, and then we'll close with just a few words from some of our speakers. So for housekeeping, to ask questions, please use the Q&A box that is in your Zoom window. You can drop any question you like there. I'll be monitoring them as we go through the presentation. If we don't get to the question in the moment, we'll have that time at the end where we'll review all of your questions that you're submitting. This deck will be sent out after the meeting. Oh, sorry, please make sure you're muted on. The deck will be sent out after the meeting, as well as a survey for some feedback from us. The microphones and cameras as you join should be off. If you do have questions or if you want to have a comment, please, again, drop that into the Q&A box. Now, starting off with who Prados is. So at Parados, we focus on creating food innovation for good, and that's across our range of bread, sweet good, and chocolate ingredients. It includes developing with sustainability and clean label products in mind. And our innovations don't just stop with our products, but they continue to some of our services, such as our new industrial bakery pilot line intended to make commercialization of new innovations simpler and faster. And we also provide assistance with the evolving consumer trends and regulatory impacts, such as the ones that we're going to be reviewing in today's webinar. So with that quick intro, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Erin to talk about what Project MAHA is.
So thank you, Michael, and thank you, Team Parados, for inviting me and GFF to be a part of today's webinar. I'm excited to talk a little bit about MAHA and then to learn from Sophia. So what is the MAHA project? Michael, you can unveil. So if you've read the news anywhere, or if you've visited almost any social media feed recently, particularly since February, you have read about MAHA. MAHA stands for Make America Healthy Again. And there's a lot of language about transformation. You see the words sea of change. It's sort of this idea that it's time to take action. And what really has driven us to this webinar today is that headline you see in the middle of the screen on the right. The MAHA movement is coming to a state near you. While we've heard a lot of discussion about MAHA at the federal level, where action is happening and thus implications for manufacturers, it's really happening at the state level, which, as Michael previewed, we will get to later. Next slide, please. So again, MAHA really launched in February, and it seeks to address the growing health crisis in America. Officially, it cites life expectancy and chronic disease. It is very rare to hear MAHA discussed without the additional mentions of obesity and overweight in America. The MAHA Commission has already done some work. I assume many of you have seen the MAHA Commission report. Grain Foods Foundation has actually done quite a lot of work to understand that and to really dig into the science to see where some of that has come from. Officially, the commission is arranged to work towards or around these 5 pillars. Again, chronic disease, regenerative ag, natural habitats, exposing corporate corruption, and eliminating environmental toxins. It goes without saying that there are some controversies built in to these 5 pillars, and we're not spending today on the controversies per se. But that's the story. These 5 pillars, and this is what the MAHA Commission is seeking to really impact. High-level implications, a focus on a cleaner label and healthier foods. That's what's driving some of this action at the state level. Sourcing and product approval will get more scrutiny. When you hear MAHA and FDA spoken of together, it's mostly about product approval, ingredient approval, looking again at the generally regarded as safe category, or yes. Regenerative ag is anticipated to get more support. We've talked in America about regenerative ag for a very long time. MAHA could bring more support to that as a practice and as a movement, and then more focus on environmental impact of product and packaging. What I hope you're seeing is that the MAHA movement is not really introducing new issues into the conversation, but what the MAHA movement has brought that is unique to this moment, I believe, is the impetus to act. And we're seeing that unfold. Next slide, please. So alongside MAHA, there is MOCA. This is the childhood chronic disease version of MAHA. Again, with the respect to the childhood chronic disease, almost always mentioned alongside childhood obesity and overweight. This sort of sub initiative to MAHA seeks to understand childhood disease and its relationship particularly to these things: ingredients, environment, policies, food production techniques, electromagnetic radiation, and corporate influence. Again, you see a really broad scope. There are a lot of variables, we would say, in the research community. And again, the MOCA movement undertakes to not just understand them all, because again, these things have been studied for a very long time, but to be ready to take quick action. This is driven by the relative rates of chronic disease, overweight, and obesity in children in America versus other countries, and seeking to impact those numbers. There's a focus on medicines and food ingredients related to disease or potentially related to disease. This movement seeks to assess current best practices and the effectiveness of existing programs. So there is a sense that they will look at what is already underway, because again, these themes are not new. What have we done so far, and have those been effective? There's a real focus both in the MAHA and MOCA movements to ensure transparency in data. If you have about 2 or 3 hours and a cup of coffee, I would like to circle up about this issue of transparency in data. I would say we largely do not have a problem there in America, but we can save that for another day. Restore the integrity of science and eliminate industry influence. If you want to follow up coffee date number 1 with this would be coffee date number 2. And I need to say this. I think although the American Biomedical and Nutrition Research machine is not perfect, it does put forth very thoughtful, very high quality, very peer-reviewed science. And I think we just need to remember that as we're looking at MAHA and MOCA, and then establish a framework for transparency and ethics review. So you feel the themes, I'm sure. But again, the real push and the thing that makes MAHA and MOCA unique in this moment is just that impulse towards, we must act now, and we will act now. That is what has caused, I think, some of the action taken at the state level. That is what has brought up this issue of these ingredient lists and subsequent warning labels. And that is why we invited Sophia today to really speak to us. A lot of these state lists hinge on, or are said to hinge on, ingredients that have been banned or restricted in the EU, UK, Australia, or New Zealand. And I think what we need to understand as the food community in the US is what has really happened with those ingredients in those countries, so that we can not only perhaps push back sometimes on the message in America, but also have a sense of what might be coming next in America on the basis of the European process. So I think I've set the table, and I think you're up, Sophia.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. And I think you nailed it when you were saying, we're these aren't new conversations we're having, and it's clear that these conversations have been going on around the world. So
Right.
I'm excited to pass it to Sophia here to talk about the EU food legislation and how that has come about. So, Sophia?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Michael and Erin. I'm very happy to be able to join you here today and to talk to you a little bit about how is at European level the food law built. So next slide, please, or next 2 slides. The next one. So here a very brief history of the food law. The food law at European level has been having some changes, and there was definitely a very important moment in time that triggered a massive change and on the approach on how legislation was looking into food safety. That big turning point was, in fact, the BSE crisis. So around the 19th, we had in Europe a massive crisis about the bovine spongiform encephalopathy, which somehow exposed the weakness of the European system with regards to securing the safety of consumers. This because before this time, was there legislation? Yes, of course, there was legislation, but the legislation that existed around the 90s was very much focusing and with the main ambition of securing the trade in between the countries at European level and was very much focusing on the primary sector, so on meat and on dairy, for example. So with the BSE crisis came a moment in time for reflection, because action was definitely needed, and a change on the existing system was of utmost importance. So with that, in the year of 2000, it started what it's called a new era of food law. And so the European Commission published a document, a very important document, which is the white paper, which basically outlines the vision of the European Union on the future of food law and how they wanted to build a system that secures and protects consumer safety. And so with that, in 2002, what we call the mother of the legislation on food was born and was published, which is the General Food Law Regulation, Regulation 178/2002. In Europe, we have different types of legislation. So we have regulations, we have directives, we have recommendations. They have differences in between them. So a regulation means that all the members of the European Union, so the 27 member states, need to implement those rules. A directive means that those requirements that are defined in the directive need to be transposed into national law of the different countries. And the recommendation is, as the name mentions, it's a recommendation, so it's not legally binding. So this being the mother, let's say, of the food law, it's a regulation, meaning that all the 27 member states need to implement it across. Next slide, please. Of course, if we look at the food law, this was just the beginning. Then a lot of legislations emerged from the European food law, but also existing legislation was looked into and was revised, bearing in mind this new structure and this mindset and this vision outlined in the Commission white paper published in the year of 2000. And with the food law, other legislations came forward and was published, namely on food hygiene, for example, on food contact materials, on information to consumers, which is about labeling of products, on nutrition and health claims, on contaminants, etc. So many legislations have emerged from this food law legislation. Regulation 178. So why is this regulation so important? Basically, starting point, it comes with very important definition. It defines what is food, what is feed, what is a food business operator, but what are also the obligations of food business operators. Also, what are the main principles for which the regulation stands, meaning being the main one about securing the protection of human health and consumer interests. It sets not only a group of principles, but also a rapid alert system for communication in between the member states, the 27 member states, about alerts and about food safety issues that are ongoing. Also addresses and provides guidance in terms of crisis management and emergencies. Also this in view of the lessons learned from the BSE crises. It also defines the relevancy and how the fact that it's mandatory to have traceability within the food systems. And then two very important elements. One is that it introduces with its Article 7 the precautionary principle. So what is the precautionary principle? The precautionary principle allows countries, so the member states, one of the countries belonging to the European Union, that if have reasons to believe there is a food safety risk associated, for example, with any specific ingredient, they can, by themselves, take the initiative for eventually banning during a certain period of time that ingredient for being used until there is scientific certainty about the safety of this ingredient. And this has been happening around history. You will see, I have an example about titanium dioxide. In fact, it is banned today at European level, but in fact, this was initially started with France, banning it at their country. And then this led to a re-evaluation of the safety of titanium dioxide, and with the conclusions that we will see later on. So this is a very important element, so the precautionary principle. And the second is the creation of the European Food Safety Authority, EFSA. Next slide, please. So I was going to talk about EFSA, but before we have here a very important definition, which is about what is food. As I mentioned, so the food law regulation comes with a couple of definitions, very important ones, because those are then reflected on all the remaining legislation that comes from the food law. And one is about what is food. And food is defined as any substance or product, whether processed, partially processed, or unprocessed, intended to be or reasonably expected to be ingested by humans. So you see, even in the definition of food, there is quite a conservative approach in terms of even on the uncertainty of being expected to. So even at the level that is considered as a food. And that takes us to the next slide, which is about EFSA. So EFSA was in the end created in 2003. And the role of EFSA is to be able to conduct an independent food safety evaluation of food. The EFSA stands for the European Food Safety Authority, and they very much stand by their level of independency. So a lot of people say that this ingredient has been approved by EFSA. That is incorrect to say, because the role of EFSA is not to approve. The role of EFSA is to evaluate and assess the risk and to make a communication about risks on food or food safety, as well as issues related to animal health and welfare, plant health, and the environment. So the way that it goes is that, next slide, please. There is a share of responsibility in between EFSA, the European Food Safety Authority, and the European Commission. So whenever there is the need, and if we focus, for example, on food additives, for a new additive to be put it on the European market, the European Commission mandates EFSA to conduct a risk assessment of that additive. And EFSA then issues an opinion, which is basically the conclusion and the outcome of the risk assessment they're conducted. Based on that, the European Commission is then the one that takes the risk management role. So in the end, it's the Commission that decides and issues a regulation authorizing or not, based on the assessment conducted by EFSA, the authorization of the ingredient or of the food additive in this case. So the two have very distinctive roles, and the two of them complement each other. Next slide, please.
And it's really interesting to see it's the journey that the European Union has gone on, starting in 2002 up until today. And so it's a continuously kind of building and adapting upon itself.
Yes, and it continues changing. You mentioned, Erin, about transparency, and we had also a couple of years ago massive discussions around transparency, and we have specific regulation on transparency. Transparency in terms of how the risk assessment is performed and how data is disclosed, data that is used for that risk assessment. So that was also, a continuation of the evolution of the food law at European level. But then if we look more particularly with regards to food additives and how legislation around food additives is built at European level, first of all, I would like to come with the definition of what is a food ingredient, because food additive is a food ingredient. And food ingredients are defined in the regulation that was revised in 2011, which is the regulation on food information to consumers, which is basically the one that sets the rules with regards to labeling at B2B, but also at B2C level. And this regulation defines a food ingredient as any substance or product, including flavorings, additives, and food enzymes, and any constituent of a compound ingredient used in the manufacture or preparation of a food and still present in the finished product, if in an alternate form, and this is a very important element, residues should not be considered as ingredient. And so with that, we jump in different categories of food ingredients that we have in Europe. So here is a very, very simplistic categorization, let's say, of food ingredients. And I wanted to show these, and here I'm excluding like GMOs and so on, because those are subject also to specific legislation and also require pre-market approval. But generally speaking, and again, excluding GMOs, we have generally three types of ingredients. So we have ingredients as such that are commonly used and have a history of use. We have what we call and define as novel foods. So these are also subject to specific legislation at European level. As you see, it's a regulation from 2015 and defines novel foods as a food that has not been consumed to a significant degree by humans in Europe before the 15th of May of 1907. That means that if a food is considered novel, so meaning that there hasn't been any history of consumption at European level before the date that you see on the screen, it means that the ingredient needs to go via an EFSA evaluation, meaning there is a pre-market approval that is required. And so the process goes, so the Commission mandates EFSA to look into this ingredient, and EFSA issues an opinion, and then the Commission, based on different elements, being one of them, but not the only one, the safety element, and for that they rely on the EFSA opinion, decides whether the novel food is authorized or not. But then we have another category of ingredients which are all together on what we call the FIAP. FIAP is the Food Ingredients Agents Package. So it's a package of legislation that is covering basically three categories of ingredients: food additives, food enzymes, and food flavorings. So these three categories of ingredients are considered separate ingredients from a legal standpoint. And so they have their own specific legislation. And they all require also a pre-market evaluation, meaning likewise novel foods, they need to go through an EFSA evaluation and an EFSA assessment before being able to be authorized at European level. So if you go to the next slide, please, Michael. So if we just look with regards to food additives, so the main piece of legislation that sets the rules with regards to additives is Regulation 1333 from 2008. This regulation comes with definitions of what is considered an additive, its conditions for use. It also comes with what we call a positive list. So it's basically the union list of authorized food additives that can be used in food, but also defines labeling requirements and on how additives need to be labeled, both at B2B and B2C level. Being safe, it's per se not the only element that is looked at by the Commission for an additive to be authorized. So safety is one element. Having the technological need for such an additive, it's also an element, and is an element that is gaining more and more importance. Because if there is no interest from the industry in using an additive, the Commission, even if the additive from a safety perspective is safe, the Commission will not authorize it. And so this has been a recurrent element very much in the last years, because additives, they are authorized. Once they are authorized without a limit of time. But the Commission can ask EFSA as soon as there is new scientific evidence, or new elements that can put in question the safety of an additive. The Commission will ask EFSA to conduct a re-evaluation of the additive. And so this is a process that we have continuously. And whenever the Commission is asking EFSA to do this, they are also asking the industry about usage of this additive. So if the industry does not provide with data in terms of usage level of this additive in its product categories, and if it doesn't demonstrate the need of this additive, then the Commission will not proceed in asking EFSA for a safety evaluation, because there is not the technological need for the additive. So the safety and the technological need are two important elements for the approval of the additive. Once the additive is approved, all the additives that are approved can be found in a database that is available, and I left the link on the slide. So each additive can be searched either per additive, either per product category, and then you can see whether the additive is authorized or not and what are the conditions for its use. Each additive has also a specification associated with it, meaning the approval of the additive implies the condition for which the additive is authorized, meaning whether there is a maximum level or not, in which type of food that additive is authorized, but also comes with a legal specification of the additive. So with the different characteristics of the additive, also in terms of impurities, for example, heavy metals, for example. So all of these elements are defined and are associated with the approval of the additive. So
just a question,
yes.
how frequent would you say food additives are reevaluated? Is it a common occurrence or?
Not common. So in fact, a lot of additives were approved and considered approved once the regulation 1333 was approved. And what the Commission defined was a plan for an evaluation of all these additives, because they had to start somewhere, right? Because today we have more than 300 food additives that are approved at European level. And so they defined what was the priority per type of additive. They have started this process, but this process, since this regulation was published, so since 2008, is still not finalized. And in the meantime, there's also urgencies, like the titanium dioxide case and so on, which, might the shift of priorities in terms of assessments. So there's really not a specific timeline, Michael. It's really based on new scientific evidence that requires, attention. But there is a plan, and that is also available on the European Commission website on the work program, where the Commission is today, what has been reevaluated until today, and what is yet to be concluded.
Interesting. Okay. So it's still an ongoing, continuing to evolve process as well. Yes.
Indeed. So if we go to the definition of an additive, the definition of an additive in Europe basically encompasses three elements that are cumulative. So you need to have these three elements to consider a substance as being a food additive. These elements are that a food additive are any substance not normally consumed as a food in itself, so element one. Element two, not normally used as a characteristic ingredient in foods, whether or not it has a nutritional value. And then the third element, it's a substance that is intentionally added to food for a technological purpose in its manufacturing, process, preparation, treatment, packaging, transport, or storage. And in fact, this is something, and we are talking more and more also about functional ingredients and so on, and whether these type of ingredients are food additives or not. And so when we look into those elements, at European level, it's really important to have these three main elements associated with the food additive definition met to consider a substance as being a food additive. So if we go to the next slide, so how is the safety of food additives evaluated in Europe? So as I mentioned before, the safety is being conducted by the European Food Safety Authority, so by EFSA. And as I mentioned, so they need to demonstrate there is a useful purpose, and then they go through a very rigorous scientific safety evaluation. So EFSA, they have their own people working in EFSA, but they work based on scientific panels, and these panels are also composed by very well-known scientists from different countries around Europe that participate in the assessment of these additives. So what EFSA does is that they collect all the scientific evidence. So they conduct a scientific review, and then they, based on this scientific review that very much looks into the available toxicological data based in human and animal models. Based on this, they will come to the conclusion of what is the maximum level of an additive where no toxic effect can be observed or determined. And this is what we normally say and describe as being the NOAEL. And this value is then used to calculate the acceptable dairy intake for each food additive. So what is this acceptable dairy intake? So the ADI. The ADI is the amount of food additive that can be consumed on a daily basis over a lifetime without an adverse effect on health. And here it's where I think EFSA evaluations are quite known for, is that whenever EFSA is conducting the safety evaluation, they put a massive margin of safety whenever they conduct these. And so they often use a 100-fold safety margin on the risk assessment to really mitigate the risk to the maximum. So it's extremely conservative approach. And this also explains why we see in different jurisdictions, you know, the same additive being approved, but with maximum levels defined that are very much different. Of course, the consumption and the exposure of consumers is also different. We don't have the same consumption habits if I compare US with Europe. And so, of course, the exposure, it's also a very important element. And for that, EFSA relies on consumption data that is available on a database that is also available for everyone to have access to. And it's these elements that they put together, and based on that they generate the safety assessment and define what are the conditions for use of an additive.
It's interesting they take a regional approach to make sure that their safety margins covering the people that would be at most risk of going past their acceptable daily intake as well.
Yes, indeed.
And just a quick question as well on ingredients that there are regulatory decisions made about whether it's banning or reducing the acceptable daily intake. What's a typical window that EFSA gives for producers come in line with those new regulations? Is it over a period of several years?
So, EFSA, they only do, as I was mentioning, the risk assessment. So imagine that EFSA considers there's a safety concern. And so then the European Commission is the one that then issues a legislation, eventually banning that food additive. Well, these what we call transition periods for the implementation of the legislation have been throughout the years reduced. So lately, the Commission is trying to push for a 1-year transition period. 1 year, 18 months max. They are trying maximum because if there is a ban, it's because there is a safety concern. And so they want to mitigate the risk of exposure of consumers. And so more and more it's becoming difficult to negotiate with the European Commission in having longer transition periods for additives that are going to be banned.
All right. Thank you.
So then I have made with my team the exercise of making a comparison about the additive status in Europe using the Texas Senate bill that has been very recently adopted as a comparison because as Erin has mentioned, there is, and the Texas bill is a very good example of that, the obligation that whenever the 45 specified additives in the bill are used, there is a warning statement that needs to be put saying that that particular additive is not recommended for human consumption in Australia, Canada, and Europe. Of course, warnings need to be accurate, so in order to be legal. And I think that was also the sake of this exercise, was to make the comparison of the status, not of all the food additives that the bill focus on, but here we try really to focus on those additives that are oftenly used in bakery and patisserie. And so we selected those that you can see on the screen. You see that a lot of them are still authorized at European level. But as I mentioned before, the fact that it's authorized as an additive, it doesn't mean that it can be authorized in all the food categories. So if we look, for example, let me take one, for example, I think the color is a very good example, like tartrazine, for example, is authorized, has a food additive, but is not authorized in bread. In EU fine bakery, so bakery mixes, croissants, and so on, there is a maximum level that is defined for its use. There's also a maximum level that is defined for its use for decoration or for whenever used in fillings. There are even some additives, as you can see, that are authorized under GMP, meaning good manufacturing practices. So there is no maximum level defined for its use. There are two substances there at European level, line 21 and 23, interestified soybean oil and Ali. They are not considered as a food additive at European level. And then you see the last one is titanium dioxide. Titanium dioxide, and then we can go to the next slide. It's an additive that has been banned in 2022, so not so long ago. It has been the latest additive that has been banned at European level. It has been an additive that has been widely used in food products in many different food categories because it provides a very specific white coloring. What happened was that in 2016, EFSA reevaluated this additive and they didn't found any immediate safety concerns that would trigger additional actions at European level, but they identified some data gaps. So these data gaps generated a lot of fuss in the media, also from NGOs. And France, in the meantime, as I was saying before, decided to ban this additive until the European Commission could ask EFSA to look into that and to come with a reevaluation of the safety of the additive. And so this happened in 2020. The European Commission requested EFSA to look again into titanium dioxide. And in May of 2021, EFSA published an updated opinion concluding that titanium dioxide could no longer be considered safe as a food additive due to genotoxicity concerns. And so this was then the trigger for the Commission in 2022 to ban titanium dioxide as a food additive. In this case, you see the transition period, because we were talking about genotoxicity concern. There was a transition period of only 6 months. And so on the 7th of August 2022, the ban became fully effective. And so no product containing titanium dioxide as of that date can be put on the European market independently, whether they are produced in Europe or outside EU.
It's interesting to see the length of time that some of that might take from 2016 to 2022. It's quite a process as well.
Yes.
Well, Sophia, thank you again for giving us the perspective on the European legislation. I think it's something that we can look towards as a potential future for the United States when it comes to the MAHA moment. So we've come to the Q&A portion, and I did have a question for both you and Aaron as well. When it comes to sort of the next area or potentially groups of ingredients that you feel could be under pressure for legislation, Sophia, from the EU perspective, what categories of ingredients do you think are under more scrutiny or the potential to be under more scrutiny? And Aaron, from your side, the same question, which ones do you think are sort of first in line for the US to be potentially under more scrutiny from a legislative perspective?
Yeah, maybe I can start. Yeah. So at European level, yeah, there has been, I would say, an acceleration also of all concerns associated with food additives, very much based on the ultra-processed food discussion. Likewise, you are having in US, because ultra-processed foods are generally associated products containing a large number of food additives. And so there has been in the last years a lot of scientific publications associated on safety concerns on with regards to food additives. Several categories of food additives are within these. Sweeteners is one of them. Aspartame has been the focus of a lot of discussions, and there's continuous push at European level from NGOs for a ban of aspartame. We also have not so much relevant for our products, but for the meat sector, nitrates, for example, are also under scrutiny. But there are also other food additives. But I would say that overall, food additives with UPF debates are not so well perceived by consumers.
So I would agree, Sophia, that UPF is the center of where the conversation is going. I think in the US, manufacturers are overwhelmed with the state lists and the potential of these state lists actually going into effect. But I think what follows some of these conversations about individual ingredients at the state level is what the federal government will do or say about ultra-processed foods. The commission, the MAHA commission report kind of teased this idea of a real focus on ultra-processed foods among some other things in the upcoming dietary guidelines. We're anticipating those to come in weeks or even days. But I think what the consumers will hear in the ultra-processed dialogue around those guidelines and from MAHA folks is less about individual ingredients at the federal level, but new terms that the MAHA dialogue has introduced, including ultra-processed grains, ultra-processed sugar, ultra-processed fat. There's a lot to unpack in those terms. And so I think a lot of things sort of flowing out of the UPF category are really going to dominate the conversation if and when we get past some of these state initiatives.
So I don't see any other questions in the Q&A. If anybody in the webinar has some, feel free to drop them in. If not, Aaron, Sophia, any last thoughts or points that you wanted to hit on before we start to wrap up?
So I have a question for you, Sophia, actually. You mentioned that when there's a question about the use of an ingredient, the European Commission will ask food manufacturers, is this used, at what scale is it used, et cetera, and that may help the Commission decide whether to bring in EFSA for the assessment. Is there any other interaction or engagement between the food industry and the European Commission or the food industry and EFSA anywhere in the process that you've discussed?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. Thank you, Erin. Yeah, so as I mentioned, the assessment at European level is done by two main institutions, so the Commission and EFSA, with separate roles. Starting with EFSA, so EFSA, they really stand by their independent status. So it's not very, there's not a lot of possibilities for industry to interact with EFSA. So I know that in US you can have, for example, pre-submission meetings with FDA. This does not happen with EFSA. So industry and if industry would like to make a submission and have a pre-submission meeting with EFSA, that is not possible. So the interaction with EFSA throughout the process, it's basically EFSA can come, and they generally do that with additional questions, and the applicants of the dossier need to provide those answers to EFSA. But there's not a lot of opportunities to exchange with EFSA. Where industry has the possibility to exchange with is with the Commission. And with that, industry rely a lot on trade associations. So organizations representing the interests of the food sector, like you have in US ABA for bread. We also have different organizations, and at Puratos, we are very much engaged and actively engaged in those at European level. And so it's via these trade associations that industry is able to provide to the Commission with data and have exchanges with regards to the use of an additive, where it enters into discussion, for example, with regards to transition periods, for example, to demonstrate the need of a specific additive. So interactions are mainly with the Commission and via trade associations.
Well, thank you both. And just as we wrap up here with the last minute, if there are additional questions for the US, you can reach out to Joe Layton, who is our VP of R&D. If you have more global questions, feel free to reach out to Sophia. Both their information's here. If you're curious to hear more information about the Grains Food Foundation, please reach out. Here's Erin's contact. You can also reach out to them on their socials through Instagram or through LinkedIn. And then finally, you guys hit on this perfectly. Ultra-processed food is a big topic. It's actually going to be the topic of our upcoming webinar session 2 on the MAHA project. So you can use this QR code to scan that. We'll also send a link to register for the next webinar, which is coming up on August 5th at 1 p.m. With that, again, I just wanted to thank you both, Erin, Sophia, for joining. I think this was super insightful. And I think we're kind of asking the right questions here to see where this project's going to take us. But thank you again.
Thank you.
All right. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. And again, we will send out a summary of this with the slides as well. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.